Good evening, everyone. My name is Mimi Plauché, and I'm Artistic Director of the Chicago International Film Festival. It is my pleasure to be here tonight in conversation with actor Rachel Brosnahan, star of I'm Your Woman, playing at this year's 56th Chicago International Film Festival. Before we get started, I would like to recognize and thank our evening partners, Citi and the John and Jacqueline Bucksbaum Family Foundation. Thank you so much for your support of the festival this year. So Rachel, thank you for joining us this evening and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So from what I read, you moved to Highland Park when you were 4 years old and spent your childhood and teenage years there, graduating from Highland Park High School. So of course, Chicago is proud to call you one of our own. I was wondering if you could just start off talking about how you first got interested in performance and acting. Did you attend Chicago theater? What was your childhood inspiration?
I think I always knew I wanted to be a performer. Well, I shouldn't say always. I loved reading. I was a really avid reader and always had my nose in a book and loved reading about worlds that were far away from Mars. And, whether that be like a jump back in time or a jump forward in time or a fantasy land that doesn't exist. And I think that naturally translated into a love of using my imagination through performing. I had my very first Chicago role as tree number 2 in Thomas Elementary School's performance of something.
Very memorable.
Yeah, very memorable. Thank you very much. And honestly, that was it. That was enough. I felt like I couldn't get enough. Was lucky enough to go to Highland Park High School, which, as you probably know, and as so many people here tonight probably know, has an amazing arts program that I am so grateful for, and more grateful for the older I get, the more I recognize that other high schools and other places in the country don't have access to that kind of an arts education at such a young age. I was fortunate enough to be able to come back to Chicago and work at the Steppenwolf on a play called Up the summer after my freshman year of college. Chicago is the city of Chicago, obviously Highland Park, are so important to me and crafted me into the artist that I am today. I wouldn't be here without Chicago and Highland Park High School.
So at Highland Park High School, were you taking acting classes? Because I also know you studied at the Actors Training Center in Wilmette. Yeah. Was it a combination of the two, or where do you feel like you really got that training?
Both. Yeah. The program at Highland Park High School was phenomenal and exposed us to the kind of material that I think most people don't have access to until they get to college. We read all the great plays and were lucky enough to perform them, and also had a student-run musical called Stunts, which was also really special, to be able to put students in charge and let them create something for themselves. It was really special. And then also, I studied at ATC with my mentor and friend, Carol Debo, who whipped my butt into shape in the best way possible, who called me on my bullshit from a very young age and helped me develop a thick skin and a really mature understanding of my craft, starting at 16 years old. And obviously ATC is still there doing that for a new generation is a scary word to say, but I suppose it is. Generation of young actors.
Exactly. It just continues the process, not a generation, just ongoing. So could you talk a little bit about that first performance, or at Steppenwolf, actually, I mean, in Up, because you were on stage with, of course, the legendary Martha Lavey. What was that experience like? Because I read reviews from the play, which were very positive. I unfortunately didn't get to see it, but
I felt like I was at Acting Disney World. I mean, to be able to call such phenomenal artists like Martha Lavey and Jan Barford, and Piro directed the show, to be able to call those artists my peers was transformative, was the gift of a lifetime. I do think that it's so important to keep working with people who are better than you.
Yeah.
And to have the privilege to be able to work with people who were so infinitely better than me at 18 years old was an experience I'll never, ever forget.
Yeah, was there something about being in a Steppenwolf performance, I guess, that inspired the confidence that you needed to really leap into kind of the larger stage, more of a national stage in terms of television and some early on independent films as well?
The thing I love so much about the Steppenwolf, it's tried and true old school ensemble theater.
Yeah.
You feel that ensemble in every beat of every rehearsal and in every beat of every show. And that ensemble experience is what helped prepare me for other projects moving forward. To learn how to do that give and take in every moment, and to kind of move and breathe as in it. There's no ego involved in an ensemble like that. There's no room for it. And that lesson was something that absolutely helped me prepare for moving into New York theater, and that I hold on to today in every project, in independent film, in television. Having that mentality changes the experience completely and makes all the work better.
Yeah, because a lot of the shows that you've worked on, the series, definitely have that ensemble feeling to them, both in terms of the relationships between the characters, but also in that just across the board, the caliber of actors that you've been working with. So I wanted to, you of course had a number of dramatic roles and, like I said, some independent and films. Joaquin Trier is one of my favorite directors. We started showing his early Norwegian work, and so I know you were in Louder Than Bombs, but your first big break seemed to have come in House of Cards, which when you were cast didn't seem like the break that it ultimately became. Can you talk a little bit about that experience in House of Cards?
Yeah, I was a young actor in New York, pounding the pavement. I think I just graduated from drama school and was, feeling turned inside out and very vulnerable as you are leaving that environment. I had been auditioning a lot to no avail, and was fortunate enough to be able to come back in for Julie Schubert, the casting director, who I had seen a number of times before for other various roles, and pulled me in for this character who had about 5 lines in the pilot named Call Girl. And I was told that there was a small chance that she might reappear for maybe one other episode. And the rest is history. We shot that first episode, and Beau Willimon, the brilliant mind behind the American version of House of Cards, saw a path forward for this character and a relationship with the great Michael Kelly, who played Doug Stamper, and she got a name. I don't know where she got that one from.
Rachel.
And it was one of the single greatest experiences to this day that I've ever had. It was a role that felt far away. I'd never played a character who was so comfortable with her own sexuality, and at the same time so open and vulnerable, and had her heart on her sleeve despite her best efforts, and working so closely with an actor like Michael Kelly,
right,
with all the brilliant directors who cycled through that show, made me bolder and braver and changed the way that I work. And I think you get better when you have brilliant people around you. That was a real gift of a couple years of nothing but getting better.
That's amazing. So, this was followed by one of the leading roles in the TV series Manhattan, which was this your first, I guess, true kind of long-term exploration or participation in a period drama?
Yeah. Manhattan was my first series regular job.
Right. But in terms of working in, you had to enter into that period universe with Manhattan, right?
Yes.
Because it seems like a lot of your work up to that point was really much more contemporary drama.
That's right.
So, since then, of course, you've worked in a couple of series and this film, which are period dramas. So I was wondering if you could talk about your approach to doing the research when you are taking on a role in a period drama. Like, how much do you depend on what's written on the page, and how much are you really doing your own research into that period?
It depends on the role. I have played a fair number of people. I mean, Abby from Manhattan and Jean in I'm Your Woman, who are fair, and to some degree Midge as well, I suppose, who are fairly sheltered from the world around them. And so it didn't necessarily behoove me to know more than they did.
Mm-hmm.
Let me kind of approach the world with fresh eyes. I think especially when it came to Manhattan, I'm a big research dork. I love history. I think it's that same love of worlds that feel far away that came from, reading books as a kid. It's one of my favorite parts, and was really hard not to dive deeply into the Manhattan Project. But I spent more time focusing on there've been a lot of books written from the wives' perspectives. The wives.
Oh, they haven't. Okay.
Yeah, The Wives of Los Alamos was a really informative book that talked about how little they knew and how much they were being asked to sacrifice to be there to support their husbands as they took on one of the greatest scientific experiments of the modern world. So that was helpful, but it depends on the role. If there's an opportunity, certainly I'm diving in head first.
And you were shooting in New Mexico. Were you in how close were you to Los Alamos when you were shooting, and just kind of that feeling of being in that location, even though there was obviously a separation in terms of time?
Yeah, we were about an hour and a half away, if I remember correctly. We shot in Santa Fe.
Okay.
We shot in the back of a college in Santa Fe in an old burn hospital. Okay. But we did go visit Los Alamos as a group before we started shooting the show, which just helped place us in time. We saw Oppenheimer's house.
Yeah.
It was totally surreal. And getting to see the main lodge where a lot of that action took place on the show for us, and also obviously for everyone who lived there. It helps. It helps the transformation process, certainly.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting to think about. I'm going to move on to Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, but that was all on a set. The shooting of it was the 1950s, late 50s. I mean, and New York was basically constructed on completely on a set, because there isn't enough of kind of that old Manhattan that's existing, right, in order to shoot there.
In New York, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
You'd be amazed. We actually are about 50-50.
Okay.
We're about 50%. A lot of our main sets are on the stage. So we have the apartments, the Weissman apartment, and what was Midge's apartment on our stages in Brooklyn. The Gaslight, the club, was on the stages in Brooklyn. And then we actually, we did shoot outside a lot. We shot in Times Square before Times Square became unrecognizable like it is right now. And it was completely surreal. We were shooting outside the Barrymore Theater with hundreds of people kind of gathering around to watch, which feels like a fever dream now. But we have a little bit of help from VFX to kind of change out modern air conditioners and signs and things. But there's nothing like getting to shoot outside in New York.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, because I didn't realize that much of it was shot, but you have that feeling when you're watching it, which of course I think must kind of put you in, help to put you in that scene, or that, rather than being on the soundstage. But so obviously you became a beloved and household name with the funny, charming, and certainly fiery character of Midge Maisel. And this was your first foray into comedy, right?
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Which I think is really interesting, kind of to come back to I'm Your Woman and contrast it. But I was like, what was that experience, or what is that experience? Because it's ongoing, and it's interesting to take a break from it, of immersing yourself into that world of 1950s, thinking about the Gaslight and that world of stand-up comedy at that, especially in that, that first season for you. What was that experience like?
It it was horrifying. I've never been so scared, which is one of the greatest gifts you could ever ask to be given as an actor, to be afraid all the time that you don't have the goods and you don't have the stuff, and to be forced to walk the plank. Essentially, it's sink or swim.
Yeah.
You know, you have to show up to work, something has to come out of your mouth and something has to go on screen. And that first season in particular pushed and stretched me as an actor in ways I never could have imagined.
Okay.
And a huge part of that is obviously being supported by great writing,
Right.
which Amy Sherman-Palladino and Dan Palladino, the writing is phenomenal. And I feel so lucky to have been supported by them in that entire journey. No one knows more intimately how fucking petrified I was than Amy Sherman-Palladino. But also to have been lifted up and encouraged by this, again, incredible ensemble cast. But it was scary, and it remains scary in a way that is exciting, because I kept convincing myself that it was okay that I had never done comedy before, because Midge wasn't a comedian. She was just a funny lady. And the funny lady part could be done through the writing. And
right.
As the show went on, obviously she goes from being a funny lady to a successful comedian who's playing bigger and bigger houses, who's traveling to Las Vegas, who's who's opening for Shy Baldwin on tour. And as Midge's career goes on and she has to become a more technically proficient comedian, I live in perpetual fear that I won't be able to keep up. But I'm learning.
The other way to see that your journey is the same as hers, right?
We definitely are on parallel paths, and it's been really interesting. I say this a lot, but it's hard to have perspective in the middle of a moment that is so full and wild and rich in so many ways. And so, about 10 years from now, I'll finally be able to talk about this moment with clarity.
Well, I think it must be, like you said, both terrifying, because, both the pace and the caliber of the dialogue that Amy Sherman-Palladino writes is just, and Dan together, is so high, but it's also so witty and incredibly fast paced. And at the same moment, it's a gift as it is something that's probably incredibly intimidating or daunting when you first are looking at the scripts, but I'm sure it's something you get used to.
Yeah. Yes and no. It's okay to not get used to it.
Yeah.
I think it's the dream to keep feeling like you're being forced into risk taking, and that you're not allowed to get comfortable. The pitfall of being on a series for a long time can be that it feels easy to step in and out of that character. And at least so far, it's never felt easy or gotten easier. And I'm digging it.
Yeah. Well, and there's a certain transformation that's happening within the character too, that must also help with kind of pushing you as an actor also along with the character.
Definitely. She's changing, sometimes rapidly and sometimes a little bit too slowly. But keeping up with her is a full-time job.
So you did take a break, obviously, to make I'm Your Woman. And there aren't a lot of similarities, I think, between the two roles or between the series and the film. But I think the one thing that I did kind of see as a connection is they're both kind of at the heart of both stories is a woman who is finding her voice, or, not necessarily literally, because Midge always doesn't ever lack words, but I think finding who she is and stepping into her life in a new way. So, I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what the appeal of that character type is for you at this moment.
Yeah, I first read the script for I'm Your Woman, I want to say in early 2018. 2018? We were shooting Maisel in Paris, actually.
Okay.
I first read the script for I'm Your Woman. There were so many things about this project that made it exciting and made me want to figure out how on earth we could find the time to do it. I loved that Jean operates on a totally different wavelength than Midge. You're right. They do share that as a theme. I think one of the major differences is that Midge is figuring out how to use her voice in a new way. She's obviously always had a voice and always believed in herself and her own capability. And Jean is someone who has, at least as of the last few years before you meet her, been uncertain of how capable she is, and certainly about her capability as a mother, whether or not she's cut out for it, and whether or not she'll ever feel that click thing that happens with this child. And hers is a journey towards figuring out that not only is she capable, but she was actually capable all along. And I think that will change her moving forward and change how she approaches this next unexpected chapter of her life. But she operates at a completely different pace. And that was an exciting challenge. She's someone who thinks a lot before she speaks, who chooses her words very carefully, and who feels things very deeply before she says them, and trying to figure out a different rhythm of breathing was an exciting challenge.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because I mean, I think there's also this contrast between, of course, something that's really fast-paced and dialogue-driven, and then I'm Your Woman, which the dialogue is fairly sparse. I mean, it's there, but and the rhythm and the pacing is so much slower, and so much more is dependent not on the words and the expression of those words, but kind of what you're holding with what the character is holding within herself. What Jean is feeling and thinking, we're reading more on her face and in the way that she moves her body. So could you talk a little bit about the approach to kind of making a different type of physical transformation?
It's funny. It's actually a physicality and a rhythm that naturally I was more comfortable with prior to working on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And as I've spent the last few years living inside of Midge, my own rhythm has picked up a little bit, and I can hear myself talking really quickly sometimes in a way that feels different from even just a couple years ago. And it's true that you take a little piece of every character you ever play with you forever. And it was a nice kind of deep breath and relief to sink my teeth into this character, and to constantly check myself that I was experiencing things through her. We had finished shooting The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel very, very shortly before we went into production on I'm Your Woman. And so I feel like I disappeared for a couple weeks and just tried to slow that internal rhythm. But a baby keeps you honest. And my lovely partners, Justin and Jameson, you have no choice but to be in the moment with them. And they kept me in check every step of the way.
Yeah. So I have a question from the audience, from Alexandra, which relates to this. How did it feel to portray a character who's traditionally portrayed as someone passive, like a gangster's girl, but from a much more direct and powerful perspective, where the character is very much, or becomes the strong lead, not just the beautiful girlfriend?
Yeah. It's always frustrating to me that we use that kind of language traditionally for women who aren't considered badass or like forthright, or that passive is the language that we use, when really it's a different kind of woman. This is a woman who had an expectation for her life and was okay not being the person out in front of her relationship. And that doesn't necessarily make her passive. But I understand why people use that word. I think there's something important about just sitting with characters that we don't normally get a chance to sit with for long periods on screen. We're very used to seeing, mostly with women, because this isn't as true for men, but mostly with women, the flashy women at the center of the story. Women like Midge, women who take the bull by the horns and who turn their lives on their heads in an active way, in an immediately active and recognizable way, and sometimes in a way that's considered quite masculine. But we don't often get to sit with these roles that would normally be secondary and take a hard look at who they are and a journey that might not be as splashy on the surface, but doesn't make them any less valuable. And so that's a long-winded way of saying it, felt really good. Something that our director, Julia Hart, said to me, part of the inspiration for this film was that she grew up loving this genre, this 70s crime thriller genre. And there was always kind of a token woman in those movies. And in so many of them, something crazy would happen, and then you would follow the man into the action. And you would introduce these amazing characters like Tuesday Weld and Thief. Right. And she'd be there for the beginning part of the movie and then disappear, and you would never see her again. And Julia was always wondering what happened to that character. Where did she go? What was her experience of this drama like? And I've often found myself wondering the same thing. And so this is that story. Yeah. This is the action, the man, the shootout has happened off screen, and you have stayed in this perspective. You've stayed in the female gaze.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually dovetails with one of my questions, because I do think like this film does so beautifully kind of turn the crime genre inside out. And, I feel that it, of course, telling it from her perspective, but it's not necessarily like just like a woman's crime drama. It is the woman who gets left behind because of the crime drama, or left alone, I should say. And then like what is next, and, what does it mean when you are left alone? And then she becomes an active agent in her own life. But it made me think about like, what are some other genres that, would, I guess, benefit from this type of shift in perspective or retelling? I think in literature, there's a pretty strong tradition of it, maybe in the last 30, 40 years of, there's a novel like The Wide Sargasso Sea that takes the story of Jane Eyre and tells it from the perspective of the madwoman in the attic, right? And, I feel that cinema is just ready for this type of transformation, where there's kind of this rich content to be mined by telling traditional genre stories from different perspectives. Is this something that you've thought about, or kind of, is there another type of genre that you would love to see kind of transformed in this way, having been a part of I'm Your Woman?
Yeah, well, every genre, first of all, there's still room for every genre to be further mined for a female perspective or female gaze. But this is actually one of the things that I think Julia does so beautifully. Yeah. Fast Color is a superhero movie done this way, sort of turned on its head and turned inside out and looked at through fresh eyes. Ready for a Western? There was a period of time, dipping back into this previous conversation a little bit, I heard someone describe Jean as unextraordinary and wonder, or just ordinary or something along those lines, and wonder why we would ever tell a story about someone like that. And to that point, we have a library full of stories about unextraordinary and ordinary men, brilliant stories that we love. Because we get to see inside someone and look at what makes them tick and watch them grow and change, even if it's only in small ways. But we seem to be unwilling as an industry to embrace that same kind of storytelling with women at the center. I love stories about men having midlife crises and existential crises. I love Dazed and Confused, but we still have a lot of work to do in terms of centering women in those same kinds of stories, because certainly we have the same kinds of experiences.
Yeah, and certainly, yeah, I mean, the story of Jean is the story of her transformation and her empowerment that is coming from within rather than from, external sources. So Dina, I think, we've answered this a bit, but she's asking, what attracted you to I'm Your Woman as a character, which we've already talked about, but also as a production. And I don't know if everybody in the audience knows, but Rachel, you're also a producer on the film. So I think, at what point did you sign on as a producer? And I guess what made you decide to take that step, not just to take the role of Jean, but also to get actively involved in the production?
That's a great question. Thank you. I was interested in playing Jean as an actor first upon reading the script. And I believe it was actually Julia Hart, our director, and one half of our writing team, the other half being her brilliant husband, Jordan Horowitz, who I co-produced the film with. I think it was actually them who suggested it and who offered it. It was something that I'd always been interested in, having more of a hand in shaping the project from start to finish, in learning about filmmaking from the inside in a different way. And also in having, moving forward and having a little bit more control over the kinds of projects that are available to me, because I can help create them and help bring them to life and help find the brilliant people in all of the departments who can help bring a project or a character that I love to life. But it was certainly Jordan and Julia who empowered me into that role. And that's not something that happens a lot. Yeah. They have a really, really special and spectacular working partnership. And they didn't need me to make this possible, but they invited me in and heard me at early stages of this process all the way through to the end. And I feel so grateful to have been able to learn underneath them and alongside them, and will be a better producer for it. But it was such a phenomenal experience, and I'm so grateful that this was my first.
Yeah. So how did that change your relationship to the project? I mean, it was great that it wasn't just like an executive producer position, but it sounds like you really kind of had your hands in it. And I guess, and what are specific ways in which it changed the way that you kind of related to the project, rather than just as an actor?
Yeah, I got to sit with the character and with this script for a lot longer than would normally be afforded to me as an actor. I was there and talking through a lot of the questions that we had as a team and changes that were made along the way. So was also able to see all of the changes in real time, or not all of, but the changes from the point at which I came on in real time that led to the final product. And even having that context made the performance richer.
Right.
On top of that, it was about being able to get to know and help find some of those people in different departments who would be helping to bring this vision that Julia and Jordan had, and then this collective vision that the three of us had, to life. And they came with some brilliant, brilliant artists from other projects. Gay Buckley, our production designer.
The production design is pretty spectacular.
Yeah, Bryce Miller, our DP, they knew from before, so it was a real treat to get to know those guys and to again be a part of those conversations about how this movie was going to be shot. I mean, in the simplest way. As an actor, I had never been a part of a tech scout.
Right.
And being able to see the locations that we would potentially be shooting at ahead of time changed everything.
Yeah. So you think you're going to produce again, it sounds like.
I definitely am. We have a couple other projects. One which was recently announced, called Yearly Departed, which is a comedy special with Amazon. But yes, digging my hands in, had such a great experience and learned so much from working with Jordan on this.
So were you also, because one of the other questions I had about this in terms of preparation is, were you involved in the music selection at all, or did you have a soundtrack that you were listening to when you were preparing? Because I think some of the songs in it are, of course, kind of some of the, familiar ones that we know, but I thought there was also some really nice unexpected choices as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of music written into the script. So I had heard and was definitely listening to a lot of that music and had it in the back of my mind as we were working towards production. Our brilliant composer Oscar added so much to the 70s music that was already in the project.
Right.
Our theme music is just so haunting, and the first time I heard it, it was, I had chills all over my body. But yes, the certainly Natural Woman, which is a big part of this movie, was written into the script, and I listened to a heck of a lot. I'm still listening to some of the soundtrack. The music is so great.
I love the soundtrack. So I have a question from Julia. Every journey to success is filled with highs and lows. Can you point to one of each of these that has really shaped your career?
Yeah. It's so hard to pick a high because I have been so fortunate that there have been many in the largest, most obvious, most tangible ways, doing an award season and getting shiny things for playing a role that I loved was certainly high, but also in really small ways. There have been I feel like I've experienced a lot of highs on various projects where you're setting up a really complicated shot and it doesn't work the first 4 times, and then you finally get it, and there's no feeling like that in the world. Or sitting privately and getting to sit with a brand new role that this has happened a number of times, from House of Cards to independent films to On Your Woman, getting to sit with a role that you don't understand at all, and spending days or weeks or even months sometimes trying to figure it out and get inside it and crack open that thing that suddenly makes the whole thing come to life, and then finally, like waking up from a dream or something and being like, I have it. Those are some highs.
Yeah, what was the point for I'm Your Woman with Jean? Was there a moment or something that you felt like you really understood her?
Yeah, there were some early conversations with Julia, but there's one moment in particular, which was actually quite a ways into filming, where we were shooting a scene, without giving too much away, where
spoiler alert.
I know, spoiler. Close your ears. There's a scene where Jean gets pulled out of a car and is physically fighting, and then drags some bodies out of a car. I don't know what that's. It's kind of a spoiler, but drags some bodies out of a car, and we shot that scene for a number of hours. And we shot the film fairly chronologically, actually, partially because of the age of the babies and partially because we were able to, and that doesn't happen very often and is so helpful to be able to do. So this is probably 3/4 of the way through Jean's journey and shooting, but dragging 200-pound bodies out of a car for many hours. I was in physical pain. I was exhausted. I felt like I couldn't possibly do another take. And then finding that thing deep, deep inside where you find that place where you can get up and do it again, cracked something open about Jean for me.
Yeah. And that's the moment where she actually has to find both that physical and the mental energy or strength to do that.
Yeah. But to answer some of those, the other part of that question, some of those lows, again, are in ways that feel bigger and more tangible, and also really small. You know, the bigger, more tangible ones, I feel like early on were losing roles that I had given rounds and rounds of auditions to, that I felt attached to with my whole heart, and disappeared out from under me for, you know, various reasons. Especially early on, those were some really low points when you're auditioning, lucky to be auditioning 5, 7 times a week sometimes, and yet nothing is coming out of those auditions. You know, a well-meaning person in my life kind of went, "Have you ever considered grad school?" And I just crumbling to pieces in my car and wondering if anyone would ever give me a chance. You know?
Well, we're glad you didn't go to grad school.
Yeah, I mean, grad school is great. It just wasn't right for me. But yeah, you know, moments like that. I just remember sitting in a parking lot in Los Angeles, crying and feeling like I was never going to be able to get out of the car. There's also low moments when, you know, when you are your own worst enemy, when even if other people are saying all the right things, and the feedback from the outside world is everything you could have hoped, where even in the middle of all of that, you're, or at least for me, my, you know, that creeping dark insecurity comes in anyway, and the you know, the anxiety of feeling like you can't live up to your own expectations or anyone else's expectations just gets you sometimes. And some of the lowest moments I've had are at moments that make no sense, you know, in the middle of something that should be very, very exciting and is in so many ways. And then suddenly you're walking down the street and just feel hollow, or one tiny thing can kind of, you know, derail an afternoon. But that's when a support system, having a great support system, comes into place. And then you know, you look back a week later and are like, I have no idea what that was about.
Almost one of the traps of like the pursuit of excellence or perfection.
Absolutely. As a serial perfectionist and recovering people pleaser, you know, but I'm encouraged by folks who have been doing this a lot longer than I have, who remind me that never goes away, for better or for worse.
Works with a question from David is, if you had to name a person who most influenced you as an actor, who would that be? So I guess, who are your influences and your inspirations?
Frances McDormand is a huge inspiration for me. I love her theater work. Even if she doesn't feel this way, maybe she does. I don't know. She strikes me as fearless and relentlessly passionate, and just her control over her instrument is extraordinary. I had the great privilege of working with her very briefly a couple of years ago, and she's also, on top of being a longtime inspiration of mine as a performer, one of the kindest and most generous people I've ever met.
It's interesting. I think when you meet those people in your life that both inspire you professionally, but also personally, it's easier to kind of like pay it forward for somebody else as well, because you know what that means.
Definitely. And her, and again, and it's the small ways sometimes that really make the difference. I had the great privilege of working with another idol of mine, Emma Thompson, a number of years ago, and I've told this story so many times, but it means a lot to me. She ran out of a trailer, and we were playing relatives of some kind, distant relatives, and ran out of a trailer and gave me a huge hug and sort of looked me in the face and said, "I'm so happy you're here." And it changed my life. You know?
It's so funny. I did a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Kate Winslet, and Emma Thompson is, for her, also one of those people that immediately embraced her and kind of gave her that confidence to go forward. So this relates to a question from Vanessa, who's saying, what would be your advice for actors who have recently graduated from a university in terms of navigating the industry?
make things. Don't stop making things. The worst place you can be is where you're waiting for permission from someone else to do what you do and to do what you're great at. And there is so much waiting around. There is a lot of waiting around, daily rejection, which doesn't ever get easier. But now there are more ways than ever before to make things with your friends, to make things by yourself. And those things can sometimes be things that grow into something much bigger or help you develop relationships with people you want to work with again.
Great, thank you. And one other question, which we touched on briefly before too, or you did, I should say, is because I do want to get a little bit back to I'm Your Woman. How did having a baby as a scene partner affect your performance?
Oh man, it was so hard, but really magical in moments. We had spent so much time in pre-production on this film and in the development of the script, assigning actions to this baby. And we knew, of course, intellectually that we weren't going to get them to crawl on cue or to say the things that we thought they might if they got old enough, or to laugh when we needed them to laugh. We knew it would be challenging intellectually, but none of us could have been prepared for that. You know, babies are just existing. They don't know they're acting. And the way that it works with babies is we got 4 hours with each baby a day. And they were about 5.5, 6 months old. And their schedule was not on a 4-hour schedule. It was running about 3 hours. So at some point in every day, they would fall asleep or be hungry or upset. And we all kind of banded together to make sure that they got what they needed. We did once, and I'm sure we're going to the bad place for it, wake a sleeping baby.
Oh.
With permission from his mom. But it, as I said before, it keeps you honest. It kept us all honest. Not just the performers in front of the screen, but all of our crew too. We were there in service of something else, and things happened with those babies on set that we never.
I was going to ask if there was something that really sticks out in terms of how a scene or a reaction or just a mood or something was changed because of something that one of the babies did, which forced a shift in direction.
There was, we were trying to shoot a scene where Jean was singing, where you saw before you heard about it later, a piece of Jean singing Natural Woman to the baby, and the baby kind of laughing and enjoying it. And on that day, the babies were not having it at all, and were not interested whatsoever in my terrible singing voice. And we just couldn't get it. And so we figured out a way to make that scene work later on where it's referenced. But while we were shooting another scene showing Jean and Harry alone together, we were just kind of messing around, and I started humming the song to him, and he loved it, and was a little bit older at that point and was kind of responding to me and making noises. And you know, everyone just kind of scrambled, and our DP Bryce grabbed the camera and just started shooting it. And there's a small clip of that made its way into the film. There are moments when they looked at Arinze, who plays Cal. They both babies just adored Arinze, where they looked at him, and we never could have scripted moments like that.
Right. Yeah. You know, I want to go back to, because we haven't talked so much about what it was like to work with Julia. Because I do want to eventually get to like the importance of what it means to be working and supporting women who are writing, directing, and producing. But first, could you talk a little bit about that experience of working with Julia and what that was like?
Yeah, it was incredible. We're dying to do it again. We're trying to figure out how to do it again now. It was the best. I was a fan of Julia's work from afar. I had seen Miss Stevens and saw Fast Color, which I just thought was phenomenal. And as I said, a completely different look at what otherwise was a familiar story or genre. and I couldn't wait to work together. But Julia, man, she's just one of those incredibly special humans whose heart extends 6 feet in front of her at all times. She's so patient and generous and brilliant, and is one of those rare people who can see the world in 360 degrees at once and is still laser focused. She brought out performances from me, from Arinze, from Marcia Stephanie, that makes us all look very good. She's a rare bird, and I feel very, very lucky to have been able to.
I mean, you obviously, working on the series, have this experience of working with many different directors, right? Often it changes every week. So you have a lot of experience with that, and you know the real deal when you experience it.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you know, similarly on Maisel, Amy and Dan, her husband, direct almost every episode.
Right.
So that makes it unique in that space as well. But yes, generally on series, you change directors every.
I was thinking of House of Cards in particular. Yeah.
Many different wonderful directors. But yeah, it's a rare experience when you can feel the ripple effect of Julia's very unique style of leadership through the entire crew.
Yeah.
Julia at the helm allows space for everyone to be themselves, which ultimately I think leads to everyone's best work. It allows everyone, even the gruffest, manliest men in the grips and electrics, to open themselves up to the project, to the material. It was a different energy than any other one that I'd experienced on a set before.
Right. So I have a question from Rebecca. What are you looking for in future projects? And does this relate to like working with more women who are behind the camera?
Definitely. I love working with women. I've always loved working with women and have for a long time. The first sort of significant role I ever played in a film was an autobiographical story that was written and directed by a woman named Lisa Albright. And it's just different and rare. And I love also obviously working with brilliant men. Moving forward, I've had the great privilege, as I've said, to have had a lot of people taking chances on me at various points in my career and letting me do things that they didn't necessarily have reason to believe I could do, and certainly I didn't really know if I could, and that's not a privilege that's afforded to everyone, and it's something that is important to me to pay forward through, especially through producing, but also I'd love to be able to continue to stretch into projects moving forward, to play roles that feel far away, that feel unattainable. I'd rather take a huge leap and fall flat on my face than do something that feels easy. So I'm looking for more of that. I love getting my hands dirty.
Great. Well, I have to say we look so much forward to not just season 4, of course, but really what's next for you, because for me it was extraordinary to see you kind of, do this massive shift in character and performance style. And I think that's really exciting. So whatever it is, we're looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing the film with this community that is very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, we're so excited that so many here in Chicago and beyond are seeing it. And we hope that we'll be able to welcome you back in person to Chicago sometime soon.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.